Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good morning and welcome to the Sunday Social on Teachers Talk Radio with Anna Hudson. Today we're talking about looked after children. I'm just going to make Anna co-host. A reminder that today's show is brought to you in partnership with Teach Well Toolkit, and Anna will be telling you more about Teach Well Toolkit during the 90 minutes. So, Anna.
Welcome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Social with me, Miss H Teachers, aka Anna Hudson. Today I'm going to be talking about a subject that is incredibly close to my heart. Looking after our looked afters. How do we ensure and improve outcomes for looked after children and care leavers? This is an incredibly important subject. I have the privilege of working with many looked after children. I see the challenges and barriers that they face. And although I was aware of some of those challenges as an educator, in doing the research for this show, I have been nothing less than overwhelmed by some of the ever increasing issues, challenges, barriers, statistics that looked after children and care leavers represent, that they are facing. So I am really, really looking forward to deep diving into this topic today. I'm not going to be doing it alone. I'm going to be joined by a very special guest today, Toya Dunscombe, who is a care leaver, an educator, now works for a charity supporting care leavers. And we're going to get some first-hand experience and some first-hand accounts from her, which I think is really important when we're looking for that balanced view as educators. But before I get into it, I just want to thank you, really, for being so supportive to us here at Teachers Talk Radio. If you're listening in live or if you're playing back, please follow us on socials and also give us a follow on Spotify, Amazon Music and Apple. Because where else would you get access to such a supportive community? One of the best things about Teachers Talk Radio is that we are just that, a massive community where we can reach out, get help, support, advice, and also free CPD. With that in mind, as always, I just also want to do a little check-in because as the Teachers Talk Radio community know, education is tough at times. And as educators, whether you are support staff, whether you work in FE, whether you are a teacher in leadership, looking after your well-being is really, really important. So how are you today? How has your week been? What's one good thing from this week? And what's one good thing that you're looking forward to this week coming? However you are today, however you're feeling, and for whatever reason you've tuned in, thank you. But please make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And if you need any support, then please make sure that you do reach out, because teachers can't teach from an empty cup. We need to make sure our well-being is a priority so that we can make sure we're giving the best to our pupils, our students. So let's get into it. Care leavers, looked after children. For many of us, we will have students in our classes who may possibly have experienced social care settings and may even themselves be a looked after child. There are different types of care. There's living with foster carers. There's living with friends or family. So that's your kinship type of placement. You've got living in residential care. So whether that's a specialist school, a unit, or a semi-independent accommodation. It could also be that you are living or that child is living in a residential care home. Foster care is the most common type. And the majority of children at present who are within that care system, it's because of abuse and neglect. tough subject today, and I think it's really important that we do give a trigger warning on that, because we're going to go into some facts and figures today that even surprised me. I guess I've always been aware, as I said before, that our looked after children and our care leavers experience significant challenges and burdens, but I don't think I realised how great that could be. To give us a little bit of context, there are currently, according to the latest data, 83,840 looked after children. That is currently a 2% rise. And the number of looked after children being adopted is down by 2%. So what does this data show us? Well, it shows us that more and more children are entering the social care system. And with that comes a whole host of data that tells us that outcomes for children who are looked after are significantly lower than those who aren't. As I keep mentioning, I genuinely was completely overwhelmed by some of the facts and figures and the risk factors that even I wasn't aware of. There's specific data around education, particularly universities, which we'll go into. But I think it's really important first that we look at some of the risk factors, because when we think of looked after children, when we think of this and care leavers and that data, quite often we're thinking about those children that we either teach, whether you're their form teacher, whether you're supporting them from a pastoral point of view, or whether you're a head of year, etc. Obviously, we know that there's significant risk factors around poverty, trauma, attachment, neglect, instability. There's also issues around undiagnosed SEN. There's evidence to suggest, and this comes from a 2022 nursing article, that says that children and young people who grow up in care are up to 4 times more likely to suffer poor health 30 years later than non-looked after children and care leavers. Up to 4 times more likely. It also says, in other statistics that I've been researching, that 33% of care leavers can experience homelessness, and up to a quarter of care leavers couch surf. 24% of those in prison have been through the care system. So there is clearly a significant issue here. And we are at the forefront of this in the sense that we support looked after children on their journey. And so we've got a duty of care as educators to try and give them the best possible support we can, because we know that these outcomes are poorer for those children. But what do we do as educators? What more can we do? What best support can we offer? Well, hopefully today we can get some insight from Toya, who's going to be able to give us some of her own experiences, both as a care leaver and as an educator. But I think it's really important, firstly, that we deep dive into some of the statistics around the education itself and how we can better provide that support. As I mentioned before, when I was researching this, I was struck myself by some of the outrageous statistics around further education, particularly university, but also schooling. So, for example, a UK report in 2022 claims that there are a host of indefensible failings that are damaging educational and employment outcomes for looked after children. It says that they are reviewing the fact that there is inadequate and unacceptable education. Now, when I heard that myself, I was quite triggered, because I immediately thought, well, hang on a minute. I know that I'm doing everything I can as a teacher to support the looked after children I work with. But as an education system, that's different. Are we actually doing enough? When we hear statistics like 74% of children in residential care have SEN needs, but only 47 have an EHCP, or that out of a sample from the government of 2,600 children in care homes, that a whopping 9% attend unregulated education, or that those in residential care, only 76% attend good or outstanding schools, compared to 84% of children nationally. I start to think, hang on a second, I can now see why those outcomes are poorer. And actually, as much as I'm doing everything I can to support the looked after children I work with, Am I being a strong enough advocate? Was I aware of that data? No. Am I now able to share it with other educators and spread that word and start challenging those statistics, start asking those questions? Absolutely.
I've always considered myself to be a caring head teacher who acts sensitively to support staff mental health. But what I found increasingly difficult was managing the negative impact on staff mental health when resolving issues related to their employment or daily work. Heartfelt Leadership has been developed by Teachwell Toolkit as a handbook to support head teachers to overcome the challenges of school improvement while supporting staff well-being. We know that difficult conversations can quickly turn into conflict if procedures are not fully transparent, understood and followed. Our handbook takes you through step-by-step processes while maintaining mutual respect, avoiding conflict and finding solutions.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Interestingly, looked after children's average attainment 8 score was 19.1. That's compared to 44.6 for the general population. So why are outcomes so poorer? Why are those scores so different? Well, I don't have that lived first-hand experience, but from working with the children I do, I would say there's some big factors. Obviously, the trauma of entering the care system can be really difficult for children. I also think that there's a lot to do with instability. Some children have more than one placement move. Some children have to enter new schools if they're placed further than 20 miles away. The trauma of not being able to see family members or of their own lived experiences must be absolutely huge. And when I think about that, I start thinking about the wraparound care we give as schools. What's the pastoral support like? Are all staff aware of which children are looked after? Yes, we have those systems where we do record it. Yes, that data is given out. But in our larger schools, is everyone aware? Do those children have key members of staff that they can speak to? Again, I would say yes, because obviously we have our designated looked after teachers. However, have they been given adequate training? And that's something I want to really deep dive into today, because before I worked in the provision that I did, I had little to no experience. And I would really be interested in listeners in your experiences as well. Do we think that ECTs and NQTs get enough experience on the care system? Are they aware of the challenges that looked after children and care leavers face? Did you, listener, ever have any training on that? Because I'll be honest, I didn't. That was never even mentioned within my training course. And that's not me having a go at any particular training provider. But when we see these children have so many barriers and challenges to education and further education, surely it must be a priority for all training providers to explore the issues surrounding looked after children, to share that data so that we are aware of those outcomes. I would be really interested in any ECTs or NQTs, your experiences. Have things improved since I trained? Are you a provider yourself? Get in touch. If you'd like to contribute today at all, please just look to your left-hand side. You'll see that there's the little microphone there. Please request to speak, or alternatively, drop me a DM, because I would be really interested in your feedback today. Particularly as well, if you're a care leaver yourself, please feel free to get in touch and share any opinions, any kind of experiences. We would love to hear from you. So, as I said before, education outcomes for our looked after children and health outcomes are poorer than for those children and young adults that haven't experienced the care system. I think that it's really important to mention that after Key Stage 4, government data tells us that looked after children are 75% less likely than the general population to enter the school sixth form, and over twice as likely to not be in education, employment or training. So how do we navigate that as schools? Do we need to put in a more robust careers package for our looked after children? It's something that I've given great thought to over the last couple of weeks, because unfortunately the government doesn't hold any information on qualifications of looked after children, that the qualifications that looked after children study after Key Stage 4. So immediately I'm thinking about destinations and thinking, okay, well, if we know that we've got this big 3/4 essentially of looked after children are less likely to enter sixth form, they're twice as likely not to enter education, employment or training, then we definitely need to address that, don't we? We need to put that extra support in place. We need to be looking at career packages. We need to be looking at how we support those pupils, because they will start to be making their way out of the care system. And we know that outcomes aren't great. So therefore, maybe as schools, we do need to do more. Are you a school that's putting in a robust package for your looked after children? If you are, I would absolutely love to hear from you. I think when I was doing the research, one of the things that I was interested in as well is what happens for our children that are in school at the moment. We know from government data that there are 20% of looked after children who are persistently absent from school. So if you work on attendance, if you think about your class now, who are your children who are regularly persistently absent? Do you know if they are looked after children or not? I'm sure, I speak for most schools when I say, attendance support is really good in most schools, and lots of initiatives are done. Lots of attendance teams work with external agencies and also do an incredible amount to try and support all children who are persistently absent. But when we know that our looked after children really need to be in school, are we doing enough, or do we need to do more? And are we thinking about why they're not in school? Is it because they're in a care home and, things are challenging in that care home? Is it because they've got anxiety? Is it because of the trauma that they face? Is it because of an undiagnosed SEND need? We know that outcomes for SEND pupils at the moment aren't great either. We know there are high waiting lists to be diagnosed. We know that EHCPs are taking a long time. But are we being pushy enough? Are we being enough of an advocate for our looked after children? To find that out, I'm going to introduce our next guest. I am unbelievably delighted to welcome Toya to the show today. Toya, as I mentioned before, works for a national charity supporting care leavers. She is also a care leaver herself and has been an educator and a teacher, head of year. So has got that kind of really well-rounded knowledge and experience, really, and hopefully will be able to kind of help me to unpick this a little bit more today and maybe help get some of the answers that I'm kind of hypothesizing about here, because I certainly don't have them. Toya, hopefully you can hear me. If you press the microphone, you should be able to speak. Hopefully you can request to become a speaker. We are really looking forward to hearing from you today. And hopefully, as I said, kind of asking you those questions that maybe can help our listeners learn a little bit more as well. So if you press the microphone on the left-hand side, you should hopefully be able to speak. Are you there?
Hello, thank you so much for having me today. I feel really privileged.
Hopefully Toya will be able to sort that in a second and join us, because as I said, we are really
we can hear Toya.
Brilliant. Hi Toya.
Hello.
Hi Toya, are you there?
I am here.
She is there. Anna, can you not hear Toya?
No, we can't.
Right, 1 second. I'm going to try something. Anna, could you try leaving space and then coming back? I'm just going to hold the fort, and then hopefully that will resolve the issue.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Toya, while we've got you here, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself while Anna sorts out her side?
Yeah, of course I can. I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about me. So, like Anna said, I did grow up in the care system myself. My mum was 16 when she had me. Struggled with drug addiction. I lived on and off with my grandparents under kinship care. I actually went to 7 primary schools, and then at age of 11, I was taken into foster care myself. Me and my younger brother were separated. It was really traumatic, and I always say I'm happy to share my story now. But when I was a teenager, I found it really, really difficult, and didn't accept the fact that I was in care. But now I do, and I'm proud of it. So I'm happy to answer any questions. But really grateful to be here today to share my story, and to share my experience of being a teacher as well.
Hi, Toya. Hopefully you can hear me now, because I certainly can hear you, which is brilliant.
Yeah, I can hear you.
It is absolutely, as I said, lovely to have you on. I'm so excited today. And as you said, I appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences with us today, because I think it's incredibly valuable to hear from somebody who's a care leaver but has also worked within the education system, because I was overwhelmed and I keep saying it, but I can't stress it enough, how overwhelmed I was when I really deep dived into this area, really. And I pride myself a little bit on kind of having experience. I have worked as a youth worker within social care myself. So, I've had that experience. I work in alternative provision. I thought I've got a bit of a hold on this. I work quite closely with quite a lot of children who are looked after. And I thought, well, I think I've got a good understanding of challenges and barriers. I understand the education system. I understand a little bit about the care system. And then I started deep diving into this, and I thought I didn't have a clue as a teacher about how poor outcomes can be. And I'm mindful and reflecting that I don't want to come across as too negative, because there are incredible success stories of care leavers such as yourselves, and I want to absolutely champion that. But it's the sheer barriers and the challenges that care leavers face. So I guess for yourself, you obviously mentioned that you'd found yourself in care. What age did you end up in the care system?
So I first went into emergency foster care at the age of 7. And then I lived on and off with my nan and granddad. And then by age 11, I was taken into emergency foster care again. And then a court order was taken place where I then just wasn't allowed to go home. So then I was permanently in care. Myself, I was really lucky. I went into foster care, and I had 2 foster carers who were really, really strict. And that was exactly what I needed at the time. They used the phrase, I think she's going to go off the rails. So I was lucky. But then my brother, who was 5, he ended up, he's lived in 13 foster placements. So it can really vary. And that's one of the challenges as well. Like you said, moving around, it can have such a big impact, and it's really making sure people value that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine what that must be like, and that instability of kind of placement, for your brother, and the impact that has on education. Because I know from my own experiences, although on the whole, if a child's in a school, they will try and keep them in that school. But as I say, when researching this and speaking to lots of children and looked after children and care leavers, many faced multiple school moves, unfortunately, because there was a lack of placements in the local area. And that was, of course, going to have such a huge effect on their educational journey, and then those outcomes as well. So, I think to hear it from yourself, obviously, delighted for yourself that you had a more stable one, but we can really start to unpick that and see why sometimes our looked after children do exhibit those more challenging behaviours or have those more in-depth needs. Because when you've had 13 placements, there is going to be a lot of attachment and trauma there, isn't it? Wow, I can only imagine. So obviously you went to school, and then what was your, I've mentioned a little bit, I'm going to go into more detail about kind of further education outcomes for looked after children, but what was your experience of further education?
So when I was about to do my GCSEs, I failed all of my mock exams, and I knew I always wanted to be a teacher, because when I was in primary school, I had this one teacher. We were on a first name basis. She was called Debbie. I was only 5 years old, and she stuck in my mind. And she was that one person I aspired to, and I was like, that's what I want to do. But because I'd missed so much school, I was educationally about 2 years behind, so failed my mock exams. I was then told by my pastoral leader at the school that my aspirations were too high, and maybe I should go and have a look at colleges to do drama because that's something I was passionate about. And at the time I was like, no, why should I just go and do drama? I'm going to try really hard. And I didn't do amazingly. I passed, but I worked really hard. And I think it was people saying I couldn't do it. I wanted to prove them wrong. And that was my motivation. I then passed my GCSEs. I went on to do my A-levels. I found it really, really hard. It was a massive challenge, but it was just, again, not living up to the stereotypes and the labels. And then I managed to actually get a place at Plymouth University to do my Bachelor of Education degree. And again, it was really, really hard. I didn't have that support network around me. I had to work. It was a challenge, but I'm so proud of myself for getting there. And I just think the most important thing I've taken from that is don't put the labels on children. They can't do something. Let them set their aspirations as high as the sky. Like, that's one of the most important things.
I completely agree. And I think it's made me think as well about how we support moving into further education, and do we need to provide that more kind of the more wider experiences for our looked after children, because we take it for granted that, you know, our students will have those opportunities to think about careers and think about the support network to achieve those careers because of their families. But if you're a looked after child who maybe is potentially going to be a care leaver within a couple of years, you may not have that support network around you. And do we need to create a better careers package for our looked after children? Because we should ensure that it's as aspirational. Because, I mean, there's a Civitas report that came out in 2023 that said that only 14% of looked after children go on to university, compared to 40% of young people who are not in care. So, you know, that to me is staggering, you know, that they're not having the opportunities, or not accessing the opportunities to be able to go on. And so you said was that a struggle for you to kind of move into university after kind of leaving care?
Yeah, so it really was. And I think one of the things, I speak to a lot of care leavers, and it's a lot to do with finances as well, because you haven't got that family behind you to support you going to university. And a lot of care leavers don't know what they're entitled to. So they don't know that there are bursaries out there. There is some funding, and that's a barrier that can be broken down as well, like knowing what their rights and entitlements are, and they can go to university and they can do it. It's making sure they know what exactly what's out there, and their personal advisors should be doing that. But I think it is something that's missing. So if schools could bridge that gap, I really do think it could make a difference.
Do you know that the first thing I'm going to do, now that you've said that, I mean, the first thing I'm going to go and do is see our careers advisor on Monday and say, I'm just going to check that, you know, do you have that information? Is it widely available? Are you sharing it? Because actually, I didn't know that. And although as a teacher, I just want to be mindful, teachers listening, and any educators that are listening, we can't know everything.
No.
I know that. But I think when we're talking about such an important demographic of young people, we need to have some kind of blanket knowledge, and at least a little bit to go, okay, actually, our looked after children and care leavers are experiencing considerable barriers. I'm going to have that little bit of knowledge, so that if they are struggling in class, or you know, they are kind of expressing maybe in lessons that they, you know, that they haven't got aspirations for the future, I'll signpost them to the people that can have that further knowledge. Because there's a lot, what I'm realising is, and I feel like I come across a little bit negative in this, and I don't want to, but just how overwhelming the barriers are. And, you know, when you're hearing things like children who are entitled to free school meals and in the poorest fifth of households are twice as likely to go to university at the age of 19 than care leavers. And that actually, and this isn't, I mean, that's just, I mean, it's literally, there are no words for me, and I'm who likes to talk, you know, but it's just mind-boggling to me that that's a statistic that our young people face. And then to find out as well, because then I was like, well, okay, out of the care leavers that do go, you know, what universities are they going to? What destinations are there for those looked after children and care leavers that really want to go. And in 2021, 2022, there was only 90 care leavers under 19 that had started an undergraduate course at the top 30 unis in England. 90 children.
It's shocking.
And I just thought, there's a massive failing here. And I'm going to be dead clear. I'm not saying it's teachers or educators or support staff. I'm not even saying it's schools, but we are part of a cog in the wheel. And yes, we've all got personal thoughts about the education system. I think many of us are frustrated with the lack of support for our SEND learners, our vulnerable learners, our looked after children. But as much as we have to do something. We have to start challenging it. And it's knowledge is power. When I researched this, and started getting the facts, I thought, I'm going to create something here, and I'm going to do it. I thought I'm going to do a CPD session in school, because I want every teacher, as a leader, I want every teacher to have. Of course, not going to be able to recall every fact, but to have this concrete knowledge weighted in statistics, because then when you see those statistics, you realise how absolutely shocking it is, and how incredible it is when care leavers such as yourselves go on to achieve, because they absolutely can. But do you think there is a stigma there? Obviously, the weight of the data, the kind of experiences. Do you think there is a stigma for looked after children and care leavers?
Definitely. So when I went into care, I was in a secondary school, and as soon as I went into foster care, I felt like all the teachers were treating me differently. I felt like I was seen as the naughty kid, even though I'd never got into trouble. People, like my friends, looked at me differently. So I ended up changing to a different school in a completely different city, and I didn't actually tell anyone that I was in foster care, because I thought that was going to be the only way that I could feel normal, and that being in school, that was my place where I could feel normal and no judgment. So I didn't even tell any of the teachers, and I don't even think some of the teachers knew, and I liked it that way. But looking back, I'm thinking there is such a stigma that made me feel that I couldn't actually say who I was and didn't get the help that I needed. There was only that one designated teacher who knew, and he was the person who told my aspirations were too high. So yeah, I think that there is a stigma, and I think it's getting better with time. Obviously that was like 10 years ago that this happened. So but still speaking to people now, that people feel ashamed to be in care because they feel like it's their fault, and it's not. And when you feel that stigma, it's constantly that feeling of, oh, it must be my fault because that's how I'm treated. And I don't think it's teachers' fault. It's just, look at the TV programmes that there are about people in care and everything, like Tracy Beaker, for example. There is the naughty kid, and I think it's just people's perceptions, and it's no one's fault. It's a wider society thing.
No, I think you've just made such a valid point there. And I mean, 11% of looked after children experience at least one school move. And I think in some ways, like, maybe it was beneficial for you to have that, and and that gave you that chance to kind of not as many people know. But then, like you said, it can also be the other way, where because people don't know, they're not able to support as much. And there will undoubtedly be some children, and I speak from experience. Obviously, I work in alternative provision, where our children have had that. Have had really difficult life experiences, and will use behaviour as a form of communication because they have had such trauma. But I think it's about, like you said, not tarnishing all looked after children with that brush. And also, I think maybe the way we support our looked after children, I know that, in the past, when I used to go in and see some of the children in the schools, when I worked in social care, they didn't want to be pulled out of classes to have meetings. They didn't want that to be mentioned at all. They didn't want the two to blend together, which I totally understood, because it makes me feel different, and I don't really feel different enough. I don't want everyone knowing. And I think that was something that when I came into alternative provision, I was mindful of, is that when we have those meetings, which I think for anybody that doesn't understand the role of kind of the designated teacher, obviously they're the kind of advocate for listeners that don't know, they're the advocate obviously for the looked after children, and they'll attend meetings, obviously multi-agency meetings, to kind of update everybody on how looked after children are doing. They'll facilitate any visits if social workers etc. need to come in. They'll also ensure that the personal education plan is completed and that it's updated, encourage children to attend any wider curriculum activities, and will obviously keep up to date with all the data and the outcomes for that particular child. However, because of that, obviously they need to have meetings with that pupil or student. They need to arrange meetings to take place. And are we being discreet enough in that? Are we getting that voice, capturing the voice of the child enough about how do they want those meetings to take place in school? And we've got to be mindful of staff's work-life balance, because obviously, you can't be having a meeting at 7 o'clock at night, but are there ways to facilitate those meetings outside of the school day so that pupils don't feel that they're being taken out of class in lessons? Absolutely. We can subtly kind of do things, and I think that's quite mindful, because while some kids are quite open with their care experiences, others aren't, and I guess it's really important that information shared as well between teachers, and good designated teachers will always do that, will make sure staff are aware of experiences that looked after children are having, and that's dead important. But it's being mindful of not making reference to those within the wider classroom, and making sure that children don't feel targeted or made to feel different because of their experiences. So I think that's that's really important. Well, so did you get any, when you were, obviously you then went on into education?
Yeah.
How did your experience, has your experience within the education system been as an educator on the other side of it?
Do you know what? I think it made me really, it made me feel so emotional towards the children that I taught, and I really just wanted to help them thrive and succeed. But I felt so overwhelmed with my workload that I felt like I wasn't supporting the children in my class to my best ability. So children who were looked after, I felt like sometimes you're just doing like a tick box exercise, and that's how I felt towards the end. But the pros is, from my experience, you can see things a lot clearer. Not to ask people to tell you their stories over and over again. You don't use those labels. But it's also knowing how hard it is for these looked after children to build and form relationships as well. So it's knowing to be patient and persistent, because knowing you might be the only stable thing in their life is one of the key things that I'll take away from this as well.
So within your education journey, kind of what ages did you teach, and what, how did that sort of impact your role and your experience?
So I started as an NQT in a PPA role. So then I taught from reception all the way up to year 6. And like you were saying, actually, I didn't get any information about which children were looked after in my classes. So I didn't have that knowledge. So it's something that I actually went to the designated safeguarding lead about, because it's something I was passionate about. So making that known to all the teachers, I think, is really important, just so if someone is having a bit of a wobbly day, it might be because of their experience, and you can help them.
Absolutely. I mean, you should, all staff should be aware of who their SEND children are, who their CLAR children are, so that like you said, you can be mindful of those experiences and you can kind of plan accordingly. So top tip, if you don't know, make it your job to find out, because that's really important. Yeah. So then what were your next steps after so you've been in primary, and that must have been quite triggering, because I guess, you enter the care system at 7 yourself, so then you're working with children who are kind of directly kind of reflecting that age, and kind of you were at that age.
Yeah, it was really triggering at times, especially when you saw children going through neglect and abuse. The only good thing I'll say is I was one of the first people to pick up on those things, so it was really good as well that I was able to see the signs, be able to report it and help those children, and work with parents, so parents weren't blaming themselves, and giving them that early help to hopefully prevent children from going into care in the future. So I really was passionate about that, and working with the families instead of against them, and that's what they feel sometimes. So then I had a reception class of my own, and I absolutely loved it. I didn't actually have any looked after children in my class at that point, but I supported other teachers who did. I then decided that I didn't want to work in primary school anymore, just mainly because of the workload. So I went to be a pastoral leader in a college So I had 400 pupils that I was responsible for. So I took on the role as well that dealt with safeguarding, looked after children, attendance. It was a really, really big umbrella. And that's when I started working with teenagers who were in care, and giving them coaching and advice. But the one thing I found is so many of them actually needed counselling, and the waiting list is just so long for these children who really, really need the help.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think I find really frustrating is the external services. And I'm always mindful that, I think as teachers we want to do as much as we can, and kind of have this argument all the time. I think when you work in alternative provision, that there's you're kind of aware of a lot of the services that are available, and there is a quite high level of pastoral support as a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
as well as obviously the pastoral systems that are in place. But I think that's one of the things I've really struggled with, is that for looked after children, waiting lists, like you said, for anything, for counselling, for CAMS, everything is so long, and actually trauma is just being compounded within that time, and schools are almost powerless sometimes to be able to improve that, because there's not they feel like there's nothing they can do, and that's really, really frustrating.
I'm just going to interrupt here with a word from our sponsors, Teach Well Toolkit. Teach Well Toolkit is a multi-award winning company equipping school communities to build a culture of staff and pupil mental health. Founded by school leaders and qualified mental health first aid instructors Steve Waters and Sunita Bagri, we're a DFE approved provider of the Senior Mental Health Lead Programme and have trained over 100 schools to date. Feedback has highlighted how beneficial schools have found the training and commented on how Teach Well Toolkit understands the mental health challenges faced by staff. By signing up to Teach Well Toolkit's Senior Mental Health Lead training, you and a colleague will have access to a fully resourced, unique programme which will support you every step of the way in your role as Senior Mental Health Lead in your school. Find out more at teachwelltoolkit.com.
Thanks, Tom. And I think that's a really important point, actually, when we're talking about services and we're talking about counselling and things. If we can't access what we need to, then absolutely Teach Well Toolkit is a brilliant service, because we do need to kind of utilise our senior mental health leads to support those looked after children and to give them that extra wraparound care. But yeah, I think it's something we're all feeling at the minute with the stretch of services, that that our children kind of falling through the gaps, especially our looked after children, because the services aren't as robust as they should be. And actually, like you said, that's what those children need. So I think there's a lot of pressure on the pastoral teams to kind of make sure that they're almost providing as much as they can, which I think is really important. I mean, you touched on it a little bit then when you were saying that you were providing that support and trying to help. Do you think there's more that we can do as schools? Do you think is there more we can do as educators to support looked after children?
I think it's really, really difficult, because I think people want to. It's the time and the resources aren't there. So I think funding's a massive issue for, especially for looked after children tutors. And say you've got a head of year that they could be responsible for 400 pupils. But being trauma informed, I think, is really, really important. I know a lot of schools are. It's putting that into practice and realising why children react in the way they do. It could be a really small trigger, but it could set someone off the day. What I used to try and do is I used to try and meet with all of my looked after children in my year in the morning, just to check in with them. They'd come in, they'd have a cup of tea and a biscuit, just see how they're getting on. And it's just knowing that they had someone there, someone that they could build a relationship with. And that's the other thing as well with staff turnarounds. It can be really hard for these children to make these connections as well. So if we can try and do something to keep our staff here as well, it was really beneficial for those children. But I would say as well, it's just listening to them. A lot of times decisions are being made for children in care and they don't have a say in any of these decisions. So being an adult who can listen to them and see what they want and listen to what their future could be. So I had a young lady who was in care she was really struggling. She wouldn't come into school. Her attendance was really poor, and it's because she was so far behind. She was finding all of her lessons really, really challenging. And in the end, she really loved working with animals. So I set up a volunteering day with her once a week where she would go to a local zoo and she would volunteer. And then our local college ended up accepting her in a year early to start that course to work in a zoo. So it's thinking about alternative ways for children to succeed in their own ways, and it's, like I said, listening to them.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's really important, kind of from a primary and a secondary point of view, to schedule in those kind of mentoring sessions or, pastoral sessions, so that and then obviously, I think as a designated teacher, you're going to develop a relationship with those pupils. If you're a form teacher or you're a class teacher in primary, obviously you're going to do that as well, because you spend a lot of time with them. But for your mentoring team, for them to have somebody, a mentor or a pastoral support, or the head of year, is really important as well, because the more key adults our looked after children have to support them, the more, I think, the more stable, the more well supported, the more kind of reinforced they feel, and they've got people they can reach out to, and they've got a support network there, and it is a network rather than it just being one key person. And I think for me, having mentor sessions once a week, or past with like you said, like a check-in with a head of year or somebody, is really, really important. I think, like you said as well, keeping an eye on your looked after children, if they start exhibiting any changes in behaviour or mood, keeping a closer eye on that, because of the challenges and barriers they face, is so, so important. And then, like you said, picking up on interests and pushing those. There's a massive push at the minute on encouraging schools to look at what extracurricular and wider experiences our looked after children and care leavers have, because within that, whereas with in other families, the children might get those opportunities, children in care may not. So it's about picking up on those interests and seeing how they can be nurtured from a primary and a secondary, but then into FE as well, because we've got a situation where only 2% of care leavers do apprenticeships, and we know that we've only got 14% of care leavers going on to university at 19. So we need to be encouraging them to pursue interests and then challenge themselves onto that next step. So building those relationships means that our looked after children will develop those stronger relationships, and then are more likely to share things like worries and concerns or interests or aspirations. So I think creating that strong pastoral package is really important. Would you agree, Toya?
Yeah, definitely. And as well, it's helping them through things that a family unit would normally help them through. So a lot of care leavers really struggle with relationships and budgeting, and it's those little things. If you do have time, it can really make a difference to someone in care, because a lot of time, when it comes to relationships, they don't know what a healthy, normal relationship looks like. And just having that one person who can talk them through relationships, it could really make a difference. And as well with budgeting, and then talking about university, it encompasses so much that I think would be really beneficial. So like I said, it's having the time, but it can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, that is a really good point, because from your experience, what is the support like for care leavers? Because I watched a really interesting documentary with Chris Wilde, and he sort of talked about not having any support when he left. It was like, there you go, off you go. When he turned 18, I mean, what support is there for care leavers when they leave?
So it sounds really awful, but it's kind of a lucky dip based on where you are in the country. So different local authorities offer different things. So you're entitled to like a leaving care grant, which can vary between £2,000 and £3,000. Some places you're exempt from council tax. So there is support out there, but they don't make it clear to care leavers unless you ask for it and you know what you're entitled for. You wouldn't ever know. So I left not knowing a lot, and I'm the type of person who stays quiet about things. So I didn't actually know that I was entitled to support up to 25, and that I could have gone to do my master's and had support to do that. So it's not knowing there is stuff out there, but that's why if the school in that local authority knows what their care leavers are entitled to, it could really benefit them as well.
Absolutely, because, you know, for schools that have got sixth forms, you know, you're going to have young people who are leaving care at the end of their time with you. And for those that haven't, they're 16. And one of the things, I've sort of spoke to a few of the looked after children that I know. And one of them said, who's turned 16, was like, I'm so aware of time. I know I've only got 2 years left of help. And so even at 16, when they're starting to, you know, obviously about to start GCSEs, there's still a fear there of what's coming. And I think as schools, we have to help address that, because we can't say, well, it's someone else's problem because they're leaving us if we haven't got a sixth form, because we've got a duty of care there to help, because that playing on their mind massively impacts their mental health. And I think it's really important that we offer that. And see, I wasn't aware of those support factors that are out there. So yeah, it's definitely something I think as a top tip for like career guides, pastoral care, or whether, you know, your head of year, etc., your mentors, have a look into what's available so that you can start drip feeding that information early to kind of help young people with that with that next step, because I think that's, you know, it's going to be so important, isn't it? I mean, do you think the care system and the education system do enough for looked after children and care leavers?
That's a difficult one. I think schools try and do the best that they can with the current situation, and I think schools can only do so much, and I think it is a broader thing when it comes to the government and legislation. But I think school routines are too rigid for children in care. Like sometimes just getting into school is like a really big accomplishment, and sometimes it's not fair to give them the same expectations that you'd give someone who has a family and hasn't experienced any ACEs. So I think it's really, really difficult, because I know when I was a head of year, I would have to take children to lessons when they weren't in any fit state to go into lessons, because of the attendance team. So I think it's just thinking about the wider picture and the experience that these young people go through. It is so challenging. So I don't think every student should fit into that same box.
Yeah, I think one of the things that kind of really struck me was I was speaking to one young person who's looked after, who's in mainstream, and they're expected to have bring their own equipment in, which, you know, is an expectation that a lot of secondary schools have. And they said to me, I don't have it, and I feel embarrassed asking for it in the care home, and things go missing all the time, and you know, you don't, and then I come in and I get the flat for not. And I said, well, you know, have you told your head of year? Have you told your head of year why it is you haven't got your equipment, instead of obviously getting the kind of the behaviour points that came along with that? And they were like, well, no. And there was this idea of kind of not wanting to be vulnerable and not say anything, taking the kind of the consequence of these negative behaviour points, and then having frustration that they were getting them because it wasn't their fault. And I thought, I'd never even considered that. We obviously have these behaviour policies and we have these expectations of our young people, and it's to help them get ready for the, you know, for the wider world. But at the same time, if we're not reflecting on why that young person hasn't got it and what the barrier might be, whether that's because we don't know that they're a looked after child because that information hasn't been shared, or because we just haven't considered it, are we compounding their trauma even more? I mean, they literally said to me, stuff is so important to me. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, he said, I struggle to hand my coat in. They hand coats in. I struggle to hand my coat in. I said, why? It's because it's mine. And it's the only thing I've got that's mine.
Yeah.
I have to share everything. And I sat there, thought, I hadn't even considered that a coat was such an input. And every day, the trauma of handing that coat in, because in the care home, things go missing. So didn't want to hand it in case it went missing, and it wouldn't go missing, but it's that big step. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, exactly that. And it's the same with say a child has an emergency move and the next day they haven't got their PE kit. We had teachers putting them in detention because they didn't have their PE kit, and it was so sad. But if they opened up, which they feel like they can't do, it's the same type of thing, isn't it? They don't want to say anything, but then they're getting into trouble, and it's reinforcing that trauma, and it's a cycle.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, My next question, but we're kind of already answering it, I guess, was going to be to say, you know, what do we do for teachers who haven't had experience of looked after children and care leavers? Or even the care system, sort of, what do they need to know? But I guess it is things like that, isn't it? You know, it's being curious, isn't it? Why haven't they got their PE kit?
Yeah.
Why are they looking tired today? Why is there an issue handing over equipment? Or why haven't they got that equipment? I mean, being professionally curious, because actually, and I'm gently unpicking that, we could get to the bigger issue, couldn't we? But is there any advice you've got for kind of teachers who don't have that experience? Because we've kind of touched on it in a way that, you know, both of us have said from our teacher training experience that care leavers and looked after children weren't covered. But so there may be quite a few teachers out there that have no experience of the care system, and if they haven't got any looked after children in their class, they don't know. So is there anything that that's a top tip?
So I would just say, if you do have children who are looked after in your class, just get to know them. I know that's difficult for secondary school, but especially for primary school, if you know you've got a child come into your class in September, like, get to know them before September, build that trust before they come into your class. And also just Google things, like watch TV programs, listen to podcasts like this. Just try and educate yourself as much as you can. So the charity I'm working for, it's something that I'm trying to get into policies, to write some guidance for new teachers who haven't had any experience. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and I know there is a gap, so that's something that I'm working on as well.
That sounds brilliant. Please let us know when you've done, because as I say, I know we'd be really interested in hearing about that, because I do think it's a massive problem. I mean, obviously, thank you to everybody that's listening so far. If you want to join in, please do request to speak or DM. I think that, you know, I'd be really interested in hearing from other educators. Have you had any training? And that goes for established educators as well. Yes, both of us are saying we didn't get any teacher training on it. But in terms of CPD for staff as a general, are staff given opportunities, particularly if, you know I work in alternative provision, we are, but if you work in mainstream, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have, you know, annually CPD around kind of statistics for care leavers and looked after children? Are you aware of the kind of what's available, what barriers they face, what challenges? I would be so interested to hear if that's a practice that your school does. If it is, if it isn't, is it something you'd be interested in? Because actually, as I said, I felt like I had a pretty good grip of the care system and understood kind of the general barriers and challenges. But once I started deep diving, it's completely changed the way I approach things. And that doesn't mean to say it completely changes the way I teach or the way I look after our looked afters. Because, you know, you've said yourself, lots of our children don't want to be singled out, but I think it's about being so much more mindful of things and being so much more meticulous around when there's changes in behaviour, presentation of pupils, you know, things they might say, picking up and realising how they might be feeling and how their experiences. One of the looked after children that I work with, she said, some days I'm tired, and I'm tired because the care home's noisy and I can't sleep, and then I come in and I'm in a bad mood, or I've got my head on the desk and people are saying to me, you know, you're not engaging, but it's just that I am genuinely really tired. And as a teacher, it's really hard, isn't it? Because you've got to get engagement with there to teach, but actually, why is it that pupil is tired? And, you know, have you thought about that, and what support can be put in place for that pupil if they are struggling within their looked after setting? I think that's something that, you know, I think we've got to start considering, because there are so many hidden challenges as well that our young people face. So Toya, what do you think about kind of how we move forward? Like how do we improve outcomes for our looked after children and our care leavers? You know, I think, you know, the fact that we've got so few looked after children and care leavers attending university, the fact that, you know, we've got these barriers around, you know, 27% of people in prison have been through the care system. You know, we've got these real heavy statistics, you know, around kind of like lost opportunities. How do we improve those outcomes?
I would say it's mainly what we've spoken about. So making sure that you are a trauma-informed school, you've completed training on ACEs. And I think it goes back to what you were just saying about the young lady who was tired. It's meeting like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's meeting those needs first before you can even think about teaching Pythagoras theorem or something like that. It's making sure that they feel safe and heard and cared for. And for young people in care, that can be extremely difficult. So I think it's listening and having the designated circle of support around that child as well, so they feel heard, they feel seen, they can talk about the stuff that's going on in their life. And I think that's the most important thing, is making sure that they feel heard. I know personally that was the most important thing for me, and as well it's educating other children on the people being in care and trying to break the stereotype, talking about different types of families, and also as well something that was really helpful for the school that I was in. We had a designated member of staff who helped care leavers with their UCAS applications and spoke about funding. They helped me to realise that I was entitled to a scholarship at Plymouth University. So it's having that member of staff who knows the rights and entitlements too.
I think that's really important. I think one of the things we did as well, and I kind of touched on it a little bit, is that because you were saying about having a voice, I think it's really important to ensure that, you know, and I know that, you know, our designated teachers will capture pupil voice for meetings and obviously for their personalised education plan. But I think if there are other ways to foster that opportunity and for it to kind of be in place with the kind of wider enrichment, for example, inviting some of your looked after children to be part of your student council, so they feel like they've got a say on what happens in school. Because you're right, I can only imagine what it's like to not have a say in, as a young person, in kind of where you live, where you're placed, when and if you see your family. Do you think if you'd had like more opportunities from your point of view as a kind of as a care leaver and someone that's experienced being looked after, if there were opportunities for you to be involved in things like school council and making decisions in school, do you think that would have helped you?
Yeah, definitely. And towards the end, I actually went for head girl, and it was one of the things that really drove me as well, and I was passionate about. And that was towards the end of my school life. That's when I did open up about being in care, and it was so empowering. But definitely, it felt so good to be able to make decisions about school uniform and about the library and help younger pupils. I think if you give care leavers a sense of purpose, it can be so rewarding.
Yeah, I think it's just like thinking, you know, as educators about how we foster those opportunities, and do we also look at, you know, making sure that they're involved and have some autonomy over things like when meetings take place. If there's, I mean, obviously we've got staff logistics, and I know that, and I'm not suggesting, you know, we run a timetable based on our pupil, but if we've got opportunities where you can say to our looked after children, look, we can either do this slot or this slot, just so that it gives them a little bit of a decision over their timetable. If, for example, it's a mentoring session, okay, do you want a morning or an afternoon session? And then we'll fit it into your timetable. And yes, you know, we've got to be mindful of lessons and not missing core subjects, etc. But if we can just foster those little opportunities, because that was one of the major feedbacks I often get from the looked after children, but when I went and spoke to, you know, some both in sort of the setting I work in now and in other settings, that they feel like they've got no control. And so just by giving those tiny little opportunities, you're just letting them feel like they've got some kind of say over what's happening to them and how it happens. And they feel like they've got some control in that, and itself makes school feel like more of a stable place and more of somewhere where they are listened to and valued. And if nothing else, that's surely what schools should be about. You know, so I think, yeah, and also, you know, if we are thinking, like you said, you know, about UCAS applications or even onto, you know, FE, supporting students in becoming part of school councils or helping to make decisions in schools is great for CVs. It's great for, you know, your extracurricular kind of experiences. So I think if you're an educator listening and you've got that opportunity to do it, please maybe have a little think about doing that, because it might just make a huge difference to that young person. And so I think that's a massive a massive step forward that we can all do, and it's such a little change that's really easy to foster. Obviously, Toya, you experienced care from a really young age, and and that's clearly shaped your career and your career now. What do you wish that your teachers had understood about you and your experiences?
I wish that I don't know whether this is how I felt, but I was perceived that I was put into a box, and that I was just like every other child in care in their world. And I just wish that people had spoke to me and said, you could become a doctor if you wanted to, or you could be a rocket scientist, why not? And just those types of conversations, as going, you should just go and do drama. I feel like that would have made a difference. And I would have aspired to do something because I had support, not because I wanted to fight against the stereotype.
Yeah, I think it's so important, isn't it? And on that, I think it's really important that we touch on, and we will in a minute, about the kind of the mental health or support that's out there for our looked after children. But on that, I just want to give a quick word to our amazing sponsors today, Teach Well Toolkit. They are a multi-award-winning company equipping school communities to build a culture of staff and pupil mental health. They are DFE-approved providers of the Senior Mental Health Lead programme and have trained over 100 schools to date. And the feedback has highlighted how beneficial schools have found that training and commented on how Teach Well Toolkit understands the mental health challenges faced by staff. Teach Well Toolkit was founded by school leaders Steve Waters and Sunetta Bagri. Sunetta and Steve are qualified MHFA instructors and mindfulness teachers. They have an impressive portfolio of skills to support school staff, including counselling, coaching, supervision and mediation. So by signing up to Teach Well Toolkit Senior Mental Health Lead training, you'll have full access to a unique programme which will support you every step of your way on the role as a senior mental health lead in your school, because the senior mental health role plays such an important part of the care that will be given, not just to look after children in school, but also considering the staff who maybe are care leavers. Because you were saying before, Toya, that you wish you'd been, the teachers that you'd worked with had and at your school hadn't put you in a box and had those aspirations. But I also think it must be, as a school yourself, having been an educator, not everybody chooses to share their lived experiences, but if they do, that as a school, that we're supporting our care leavers who may be within our school as educators, support staff, admin, and if a staff member chooses to share that experience, that there is a support package there. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I was a head of year in school, I did make it public that I was a care leaver, and I found that a lot of pupils actually came to me and wanted to build a relationship because they're like, oh, well, you've been here, you kind of understand me. And I think that is what's lacking. It is care leavers don't want, or care experienced people don't want to open up because they feel like they're not understood, and that's a really important thing. And from being an educator, it can be quite triggering because you feel like you're reliving a lot of the things that these young people are going through, and you kind of want to be able to fix their problems, and you know that you can just be a listening ear, and I think that can be one of the most challenging things.
I think you've just made a really good point there. And for any listeners that are care leavers who maybe work within education, it is, of course, your personal choice whether you choose to share that or not. But if you do, I hope that leaders who may be listening and colleagues are mindful of that, because it's not something I've ever considered until you mentioned it, that, for those staff members who have shared that they were care leavers, are they struggling? And if they get looked after children in their class, is there anything about that that's triggering? Do they feel like they need a little bit more support? Are they given opportunities for kind of like supervision, check-ins with their line manager or SLT, so that, if there are any experiences around that they can get that little bit more support and kind of talk that through. Because did you find that yourself, that you kind of, when you, there's that such an affinity with children that you were teaching that you kind of just wanted to like fix all their problems? Because that must have been incredibly kind of overwhelming and draining.
Oh yeah, it was really draining. I would find myself going home, taking everything home with me and thinking about it for hours. And that's just because I'm an empath and I really, really do care about the young people that I worked with. And I just really wanted to see them go into the world and be kind and do well and again, break the stereotypes. But it did take an emotional toll on me. And that is why, in the end, why I did end up leaving education, is because I found myself just wanting to fix problems. And I wanted to do so much more than the education system would allow me to do, if that makes sense.
Were you, and obviously you don't have to close everyone, but do you feel that, were you given enough support because from kind of a leadership point of view? Because it's not something that I've ever considered doing before, but actually it's making me consider now for those staff that, you know, if they have disclosed that they are care leavers, do we put in a little bit more support and check in? Do you think that would have made a difference to you if you'd had perhaps supervision or opportunities to kind of talk through things a little bit more?
Yeah, I think so. And it wasn't something that I didn't even think about getting support for myself at that point. I just wanted to help the young people. And I think if I did take a step back and look at the wider picture and realise that it's taking a toll on myself, I would have definitely lasted longer. But I think it just goes into the conversation we're having, that when you're an adult and you're a care leaver, being a care leaver doesn't exist anymore to most people. So you're just a normal adult in the world, and kind of just get along with it. And I wish it wasn't like that and how you feel. But like you said, I think if I had that support, it would have been different.
Do you think there are there a lot of challenges as a care leaver that you face? I mean, we've talked about kind of, the fact that although there is some information about grants and things, and we've talked about the fact, there's the issues around university and further education. And I know that there's a really interesting statistic that says only 22% of care leavers aged 27 are still in employment, compared to 57% of others. So we know that there's all these kinds of things, but within, obviously, want to be mindful of your own boundaries here, but within your sort of like within everyday life, with life outside of care, does that still come with challenges for a career, for life? Does it still pose challenges?
Every day there's a challenge, and I like to think I'm quite a strong person, but there's still days when I feel down and I wish I had a mum, and things like that still exist. And one of the things I talk about with my colleagues is imposter syndrome. So some days I'm like, is this really my life? Have I actually achieved these things? It doesn't feel real, and it kind of feels like a blur, and like trying to process everything that's happened. So I'm really lucky, and my previous employer paid for me to go to therapy, and I was able to speak about things and process why I do things in a certain way and why I react the way I do. But for people who haven't got that opportunity, trying to process it in their own head, you can see why the statistics are the way they are. And one of the other things that we get a lot is people who are trying to process what they've been through. They try to access their social care files. And it can open a tin of worms, and it's something that is going on. So my current role, we're helping care leavers who are aged 25 all the way up to 85 who are still going through these daily struggles that people face when they're in school.
It's incredible, really, isn't it? Because it's something we've got to just be so mindful of as educators, that for our care leavers, I want to be as positive as I can, because I feel like sometimes when I throw all these kind of negative statistics, we're saying, oh, there's no hope. There is, of course. We've got incredible care leavers like yourself that go on to do incredible things, and it's so important. But as educators, the support we give now can make such a difference for young people beyond care. And that's why I guess as educators we need to give as much support as we can, because the issues and challenges don't end at the school door, and they don't end at 18, and they don't end at at 20, 30, 40, 50 years plus. This is something that people will experience and will be with them forever. So I guess I feel quite acutely the kind of the responsibilities an educator to say, okay, well, what can I do then? What is it? How can I create that stable environment? How can I create that best possible experience? How can I be mindful, and how can I best support so that they've got that foundation, our young people, to go on? And then from a I guess a point of view of staff, if we do have staff that are care leavers and share that, are we making sure there's enough support there? Are we kind of giving opportunities? And actually, as a whole school, one of the things that I've been really keen to do is get speakers in who are looked after, have our care leavers who have been looked after, to share their experiences, positive and negative, because I think it can be really inspirational, like today, to hear from yourself of the things you've achieved, but also to hear from the experiences, so that we can really understand that journey for a looked after child and care leaver, because that way we're breaking down that stigma, but we're also celebrating the successes as well as kind of the understanding the negatives, because there are loads of successes, that there are incredible ones, but there are so many factors that can impact young people and can impact into adulthood. And I guess when we talk about trauma and adversity and neglect and all these other things, we need to be so mindful, don't we? I mean, obviously the statistics around mental health for care leavers is poor, and is poorer than average, I'll say. What advice would you give to anybody who maybe is either a looked after child or a care leaver? How best can they take care of their mental health?
I would say it's okay to feel sad, because for so long I just went about going, I have to be positive, I have to move forward, like it's okay, but it's okay to feel sorry for yourself, and like I can't express that enough. And also, you don't have to tell everyone your story. I think that's so important, because going through life, you say, I've been in care, like, oh, what happened to you? You must have been through something horrible, and like, have your boundaries, be confident, and like I said, take care of yourself. It can be, I know from my personal experience, you just try to do everything in like a day. You don't want any still time, but take that time to reflect. I would say journaling is one of the biggest things that's helped me, just writing down your feelings, because that can be one of the only ways to express it if you don't have that support system around you as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've been obviously such a big advocate for looked after children and care leavers, and I think a top tips like that, obviously journaling, mindfulness, reaching out for support, I think are huge. And I think also, I guess for adults and children, not presuming, and for the foster carers and children's homes, not presuming that everybody knows where to get mental health support from, because actually they might not. I think it's really important to be mindful to have that information available for families, for care homes if they need it, for pupils and students, and also for staff as well. I think obviously Teach Well Toolkit have this senior mental health lead course, and I think as part of that, one of the great things is that they guide you through that. So myself as a senior mental health lead, I know where all those support agencies lie. I know kind of how to signpost to them in a supportive way, and I think that's massively important to anyone listening who works in schools. We are all really busy. Obviously, not everyone can be in charge of everything, but make sure you're aware of kind of what support's out there, so that for yourself, but also so you can signpost other people, whether it's colleagues who have experienced care leavers and experienced care, whether it's the families reaching out, because, as we mentioned earlier on, there are different types of placements which include kinship. So for those, my experience with those families is that quite often they can feel a little bit overwhelmed at times, and maybe there's that many services working. Sometimes as school, you can really be that support, and you can signpost families to additional support if you've got that information. So that to me is a massive one, is just be aware. And obviously, as head of year or, class teacher in primary, you're going to have that knowledge. And of course, your designated class teacher is going to be involved with that family and do great things, as are your pastoral teams. But if you can just arm yourself with that knowledge, if you see them at the school gate, if you're making a phone call home, sometimes just saying, well, have you thought about this? Or, oh, this is available if you need it. It can just make a massive difference, because it feels like a lifeline. So I can't stress enough to anybody listening, like, just take that little bit of time to go away and find out what support's available, and just what agencies and charities and organisations are available to support everyone, but particularly your looked afters, because it might just make sort of all the difference. Toya, what advice would you give to any looked after children? If we've got any listening today, welcome. Thank you for finding the podcast. But if you've got, for any looked after children who are listening, what advice would you give them? Almost like, what advice would you give to your former self?
I would say you are wonderful and brave, and you can become anything in this world that you want to if you put your mind to it, and you will do brilliant things, whether that's going to college, going to university, anything that you want, you will do wonderful things.
That's amazing. And I think we really need to promote that and really aim high for our looked after children and our care leavers, and like you said, be aspirational. And it makes me really sad to think that there was a teacher that told you to kind of dampen that.
Yeah.
And how did that, I'm a massive champion for teachers, and I think, sometimes we get such a bad press, and we just have so much stigma ourselves as educators with, the press, that the view. It's a tough job. I'm not saying, and we're humans and we have bad days, but I cannot imagine. It would never enter my head to say that. And I know I speak on behalf of all listeners when I say none of us would say that, but as a young person who was, had experienced a lot of trauma and a lot of unsettlement in your life, like, how did that make you feel?
It made me feel angry, and I don't ever really get angry either. But do you know what? It was the motivation I needed to get me where I am today. So I always say I wouldn't change any experiences that have happened in my life. But I did have that one amazing teacher in the beginning of my childhood as well. So I think they kind of counteracted each other. I had that first teacher who made me want to become a teacher in the back of my head, saying you can do it. So I had two completely different experiences that have made me the person who I am today.
Wow. Well, that says it all, doesn't it? That when that one positive teacher has had such a lasting experience on you. And listeners, we need to be the advocate. We need to be the champion for our looked after children and our care leavers. We are fighting a really, really difficult system, and I think we're all aware of that. We know our systems and organisations are underfunded. We know that social care education is struggling and is under pressure, and there are massive challenges. But we have the power every day to make a difference. We may not be able to change everything, but we absolutely can change the day-to-day experiences of our looked after children. And what better example than the one Toya's just given, that there was a teacher that kind of was relentlessly positive and aspirational. And I think it's really important that we do that for our looked after children, that we give them those opportunities and that we push them to take their opportunities. Because one of the things when I was speaking to one looked after pupil was that she's got a lot of issues around self-esteem, and she said, well, I don't feel like I can do it, so I never push myself out of that comfort zone to try new things, because I feel like I'm going to fail, and fear of failure isn't an option for me, because I feel already a failure. Does any of that resonate with you at all, Toya?
Yeah, definitely. I was the type of person who thought if everything went wrong, then the whole world was going to end, and I would catastrophize everything in my life. So I can completely understand. But having that person who, it's safe to fail. They make a mistake, we get back up, we try again. And having that one person who could show them that kindness and warmth it really will make a difference. So if you've got 5 minutes of your day where you can be that person for someone, like that teacher was for me, it can change a child's mindset.
I think that's really important. And speaking of mindset, I just want to give another massive shout out to our incredible sponsors, Teach Well Toolkit. They are a multi-award winning company that equips school communities to build a culture of staff and pupil mental health. They're a DFE approved provider of the Senior Mental Health Lead programme, which is incredibly important. And they have trained over 100 schools to date. Feedback has highlighted how beneficial schools have found the training and commented on how Teach Well Toolkit understands the mental health challenges faced by staff. Teach Well Toolkit was founded by school leaders Steve Waters and Sunita Bagri. Sunita and Steve are qualified MHFA instructors and mindfulness teachers, and they have an impressive portfolio of skills to support school staff, which includes things like counselling and coaching, supervision and mediation, which again are such vital components for school teachers and leaders and school life. By signing up to the Teach Well Toolkit Senior Mental Health Lead training, you will have access to a fully resourced, unique programme which will support you every step of the way in your role as Senior Mental Health Lead in your school. And again, I can't stress enough, when you're completing that qualification, support is everything. And it is the incredible work that Teach Well Toolkit have done that allows that programme to be so successful. And I really hope if your school doesn't have a senior mental health lead, that you go away and champion it and inquire with Teach Well Toolkit, because I promise you, you won't regret it. It's such a valuable role for pupils and staff in schools. I cannot recommend it highly enough. So Toya, we're sort of starting to wrap up now and come to the end of our podcast. I'm so grateful to you for coming on today and for giving your experiences. I mean, as I said, at the beginning of the show, I haven't got this lived experience. I have worked for social care. I have worked in schools with lots of looked after children. But to hear your experiences today has been such an incredible opportunity, and I'm so grateful. I mean, are there any top tips, thinking about kind of your role as kind of now obviously within your charity, but also thinking about kind of having been an educator and both in FE and primary, if you could give some top tips to school staff, to education staff, what would they be?
I think it's try and take a step outside of your day-to-day classroom activities and to really think about those children in your class, really try to get to know them, to understand them, and try to just give them the tiniest bit of your extra time if you can, because it can really make a difference. And to help that child feel a bit more loved and valued, it will help them go far.
Yeah, I massively agree. I mean, from a teacher point of view myself, I cannot stress that I recognise that our workload is massive. I know that
it is,
and it is, isn't it? And it's hard. But I think some of the things I'm taking away from today, from yourself, and the amazing kind of info you've given and the food for thought you've given today, are things like teachers, ECTs, NQTs, you need to know who your CLAR children are. That doesn't mean you need to go up to them and ask them what their lived experience is, because a warning, please don't do that. That can be incredibly triggering. But you need to know who your CLAR children are. There's a number of reasons for that. It will include things like you said yourself, Toya, thinking about making sure you're talking about different types of families. It's also thinking about the language that you're using. Again, just as a real top tip, don't assume it's parents at home. When you're talking to children and young people, either ask them who's at home. If it's primary, you could say who's your grown up, but ask that. For secondary, ask who's at home, or say parents and carers. Don't immediately just say, well, I'll phone your mum and dad, because that could be triggering for a looked after child. And it's something that I'm really passionate about spreading. You need to be careful about the language you're using. And that's why, I mean, it's good practice for anyone, because obviously all families do look different, and we don't want to trigger any children that have maybe had bereavement, or their families are different, or in any way kind of maybe ever changing, but you need to be careful of that language that you're using, but also you do need to find out who your CLAR children are. That's, you must find that out because it's very, very important. Also, like we said, don't go over and start. It's hard because when you've got CLAR children, you looked after children. You kind of want to know, not because you're being difficult or because you're being nosy, but because you're thinking, I don't want to say something that could be triggering. It's imperative that you're not asking children what they've experienced. It may be that you can go to your designated teacher and get more information. It may be that you can go to your SENCO, to your safeguarding lead, and get a little bit more information. But please be mindful of how you talk to children about their experiences. If children open up to you, be supportive, listen. Don't ask probing questions. Really think about the care and the support that you're giving them if they are choosing to disclose things. And sometimes, I don't know about you, Toya, but I've had experiences where I'll look, particularly, as a PSHE teacher, our looked after children have wanted to share their experience and wanted to kind of share that with class. And so then it's about setting that boundaries as a class, being really mindful that if a child is sharing their experiences and wanting to, that the class as a whole are being respectful, that there's boundaries in place and that you manage that quite carefully to give them the best support. Would you agree with that, Toya?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it applauding them if they do want to do that, because it's so brave as well, and giving them that recognition and really hyping them up to say how amazing they are. But also in the alternative, if they don't want to, letting them know that that's absolutely fine. And throughout their life, they don't have to share their story. So it's both ends of the spectrum there.
Absolutely. Also, please sort of, seek out that information about the statistics around outcomes for looked after children and care leavers. Perhaps ask your DSL or your designated teacher to do some CPD, because we need to change these outcomes. We may not be able to change the system, but we can do more to support our looked after children in schools. So please make sure that you are sharing, go out, do the research, get the information, and if not, encourage colleagues to listen to podcasts, listen to this one, download it, share it with your colleagues, and make sure that you're spreading that information, and get that training if you can booked in. Get speakers in to talk about care experiences, because it is massively important as educators that we understand the journeys, the outcomes, the challenges, the difficulties and the successes of our looked after children and care leavers. Toya, I just want to say a massive thank you again for coming on today. I feel like I've learned so much, and you've given me so much to take away and to think about today. And I'm really grateful for you sharing your experiences, because it will certainly make me be more professionally curious and make me be more mindful of what our looked after children face and how I look after our looked afters. Thank you so much for everybody today for listening and contributing. I'm so grateful, and I will see you all again soon. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I've always considered myself to be a caring head teacher who acts sensitively to support staff mental health. But what I found increasingly difficult was managing the negative impact on staff mental health when resolving issues related to their employment or daily work. Heartfelt Leadership has been developed by Teachwell Toolkit as a handbook to support head teachers to overcome the challenges of school improvement while supporting staff well-being. We know that difficult conversations can quickly turn into conflict if procedures are not fully transparent, understood and followed. Our handbook takes you through step-by-step processes while maintaining mutual respect, avoiding conflict and finding solutions.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher, or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more, and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.